Welcome back. Part two of the France 24 debate. We're watching Iranian elections, which take place less than 24 hours from now. And it's the first time in the country's history that both Parliament and the Assembly of Experts are up for re-election on the same day. In this part of the debate, we're going to be watching in particular the importance of the Assembly of Experts, a body of 88 clerics. They're the ones officially who will nominate, who will appoint the next supreme leader of Iran, whom, as we know, is at the center, is the focal point of Iranian politics. We're going to be discussing this with my guest this evening, Ardavan Amiraslani, an Iranian author and lawyer. He's with us on set in Paris. Around the world, joining us from London, Elie Geranmaye, Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, will be coming to you in just a moment. Patrick Clausen is with us from Washington, a Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He's been telling us about how there's so little difference and separation between the so-called reformist and conservative camps. We've been talking about that. Reza Marashi is the Research Director at the National Iranian American Council, also in Washington. Thank you very much. Elie, let's start with you. The Assembly of Experts, I'm reading with some analysts that this is actually a more important election than the Parliament. Would you agree with that?
It's certainly a very, very crucial body, and it will also be even more important in the next 8 years. A lot of people think that this body, within its tenure, is going to decide the fate of the next supreme leader of Iran, given that the current supreme leader may step down because of age or for other reasons.
Ali Khamenei is 76, just reminding our viewers, and he's been ruling Iran for 27 years.
Indeed. So this 88-member body could fundamentally have a big say in how the future framework of the supreme leader and the contours within which he operates are governed and controlled, and checked and balances are placed on it. So in some ways, you could say that the Assembly of Experts would have a bigger hand for the future framework of Iran as the Islamic Republic than the Parliament would do.
How much potential you've been... As you said, the supreme leader may be replaced over the tenure of this particular Assembly of Experts. How much potential for upheaval is there after the passing of the current supreme leader?
Well, I think certainly there's a lot of damage limitation plans probably being put into place at the moment. The council is likely to deliberate not only amongst itself, but amongst various groups of Iran's power centers, those who hold biggest influence and power within the Iranian system will have a big influence on the elected members of this body. And I think what's important here also to remember is that a lot of the people that are standing for elections for this body, out of the 161 that are allowed to stand as nominees, are similar to the 88 members that currently sit. So we shouldn't expect a huge shift in the framework of the candidates themselves, but what we may want to look out for is actually the power centers and the public discourse around the next supreme leader and how that influences the decision of this body going forward.
Reza Marashi in Washington, I want your opinion on something that was made public earlier this month. Apparently, the supreme leader telling the Assembly of Experts that they needed to be ready for such time as they would have to replace him. I mean, how do you interpret that? Is he actually really sending a sincere signal that perhaps he won't be leading the country for much longer, or might there be a ploy behind this?
My personal view is that he's sending a signal that everybody dies at some point in time. And
so he's sincere?
I think so. But I also think there's a more important message that's connected to this thing of everybody dies, which is survival and stability of the system has always been #1 priority pretty much across the political spectrum, particularly for somebody like Ali Khamenei. And I think by him coming out and saying what he said, releasing pictures of him in his hospital bed after he had prostate surgery, these are trying to send signals not just to the political elite, but to the public, so that it doesn't come as a shock if and when that day happens. Because stability and survival of the system is the #1 priority for the vast majority of the individuals who make up Iran's political elite.
Patrick Clausen, also in Washington, you have the same take on this, that essentially the Supreme Leader is trying to use what time he has left to ensure the stability of Iran?
Yes, and it's going to be quite a difficult task, because whoever takes over next is not going to inherit all the powers that the current Supreme Leader has. This Supreme Leader took him years to build up his office and to exercise a lot of power. When he first came in, he was a very weak figure. And it's quite likely that whoever succeeds him will also have to take years to build up their power, and will face real constraints. The power centers that your previous speakers noted are going to be involved in selecting the next Supreme Leader are likely to want someone who's going to be pretty weak in this post. And so we may find ourselves with a new Supreme Leader who's not young and not very powerful at first.
And Patrick, what about this argument that, you know, as you said, the Supreme Leader has built up his office. When he came, there were 200 people working for him. Now there are 1,000 people advising him on all the matters. He's also taken control of military affairs. And this office in itself guarantees the continuity of the power structure in Iran. What about that argument?
It seems unlikely that the next Supreme Leader will inherit the office with all of its authorities. It's much more likely the next Supreme Leader will be in the kind of position that Khamenei was in when he first came in. Rafsanjani, who tends to be a little too blunt in his memoirs, describes that after Khamenei had been in power for a couple of years, Khamenei came to see Rafsanjani and complained that he had nothing to do, and that how was he supposed to spend his time during the day? And so it's more
Well, that
likely,
has changed.
Well, but it's the personal connections that Khamenei has used and had made people dependent upon him personally that has given him power. It's not institutions. It's personal power of the Supreme Leader. And with the passing of this Supreme Leader, all of that will have to be rebuilt by his successor. That'll take time.
Ardavan?
The function of Supreme Leader in Iran is the pillar of the Islamic Republic and the theocracy. So when the moment comes when someone has to choose who's going to replace him, I'm not even sure that the assembly of experts will be alone in deciding who's going to replace Khamenei. Because there are other centers of power that are not represented, such as the Revolutionary Guards, that basically control huge chunks of the Iranian economy that will have their say. But what I think personally is that the last strong, powerful, charismatic leader that Iran will have is going to be Ayatollah Khamenei. I don't think that the next one, as it was mentioned, is going to be as charismatic and powerful as he is. As a matter of fact, no one among the centers of power.
The system won't let him?
Because the society has evolved, because people are no longer interested in having a ruling monarch-like figure that will have the last word on every specific issue. He designates, for example, all of the top ranks in the Iranian army. He has the final word on foreign affairs, on the judiciary. Let us remember what Rafsanjani, who used to be the Iranian president a couple of years back, said. He said that he's beginning auditioning candidates in the event that there would be a vacancy in the function. He even raised something which is considered as a lèse-majesté, a horrendous concept to even consider that the function may be allocated to a collegial body. So if the power of the function is diluted amongst a number of different people, the Iranian Republic, as we know it, will change. And I think this is the path upon which the regime has embarked, and I think that's where we're going to go to.
Ellie, as we discuss what may happen in the event of the passing of the current Supreme Leader, how much leeway does this open up for reform in Iran?
Well, I think if there is a body, for example, of this collegial council of leaders that was suggested by former President Rafsanjani, that could actually in some ways pave the way towards a more democratic style of leadership under the Supreme Leader's office, because it would create more checks and balances within that system. And it could potentially, but not necessarily, disperse the power of that center. Now, whether that in itself is going to create a chain of instability within the straight structures remains to be seen. But it is
No, I wasn't referring necessarily to instability and upheaval this time. I was referring more to, does it open the door for more reform once Ali Khamenei is gone? Well,
I think that's entirely dependent on who replaces him and what type of a mindset and background that person comes from. And I think we've seen that within the lifetime of the Islamic Republic of Iran, there have been some interesting figures that have propped up, some radicalist reformists, some radicalist principalists, and it just remains to be seen to see which type of body has most influence over who the next supreme leader is going to be.
Now, you mentioned that in the event of a collegial body of a group of experts instead of one single supreme leader, that might provide a bit more democracy, if only because it provides more checks and balances. But those checks and balances already exist in the Iranian system. The Assembly of Experts officially has some oversight over the supreme leader.
That's true. The checks and balances do exist in theory, de facto, within the constitution. But there have been certain power centers, for example, the IRGC, that has exercised a disproportionate amount of weight and influence in those decision makings. And so if this Council of Leaders disperses that power amongst different power centers, then that could actually create a more balanced style, more moderate and centrist position from the leader's office itself.
Reza Marashi, do you also share this opinion that after the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei is gone, Iran is going to change just because the times are changing? That's what Ardavan was telling us earlier.
I certainly would think it's within the realm of possibility. But I think, I think it's important to point out that the ideological proclivities of whoever the next supreme leader is, or whoever the, 3-person, 5-person, replacement of the institution of supreme leader, whatever it ends up being, those ideological proclivities matter. And I think this speaks to a larger issue within the Iranian system, which is some people within the system have learned to play nice with others. There is a small but increasingly violent group of people within the system that have not learned to play nice with others, and that haven't learned to share, and haven't adopted positions that are in line with not only others within the system, but with the majority of Iranian society as well. And that's something that's going to need to be reconciled increasingly after these upcoming elections, but certainly in the run-up to and in the immediate aftermath of choosing a new supreme leader.
Ardavan Amir Aslani.
The situation is so dire in Iran that the reformist camp under Rouhani is not even considering a huge victory on the occasion of these elections. They're hoping at the best for a slight, minute majority, or most probably a strong minority. Because they know, as it was mentioned, that those against whom they're leading this fight are tough people for whom dialogue is no longer their top priority. Look at what's happening continuously. Each time, for example, the Iranian foreign minister drops out of the country, they create an embarrassment for him. When he walked into London, they arrested an ex-BBC journalist. When the implementation day was about to take effect, they arrested the American sailors. It's an ongoing process where they constantly try to create obstacles and embarrassment for the leadership. And these people have understood that in the face of this provocation, only silence should be opposed, because everyone knows that it won't go far away. But that's the length to which they're willing to go. Today, these elections are very important because they're going to talk about, at the end of the day, whether the people of Iran, national sovereignty, will prevail against ideology. If these elections turn badly, what Iran is going to go through in the future.
By turning badly, you mean?
I mean, if, for example, despite the odds, the reformists don't end up with either a slight majority or a very substantial minority, well, we're going to have an institutional crisis in Iran, and we may end up in the same situation in which Iran was after the contested elections of Ahmadinejad, where you had millions of Iranians in the streets. These elections have to, one way or the other, reflect the desire of the people. And around this concept, there's no way out.
Patrick Clausen, about this issue of what difference it might make if the supreme leader were no longer in power, when it's no longer Ali Khamenei. You were saying earlier that none of the issues that matter to the West, especially in terms of nuclear politics, regional politics, the conflict with Syria, etc., none of those issues will change after these elections. If Ali Khamenei were no longer in power, that might change, right?
That's true. We don't have a good sense of the internal politics in the Revolutionary Guard Corps, and we don't have a sense of whether or not there's a strong faction of the Revolutionary Guards who are more interested in their personal economic enrichment than they are in the revolutionary ideals. And the optimist to me would like to say that maybe the Revolutionary Guards will fracture the way in which most institutions in Iran have ended up fracturing over time, and we could see a different set of policies. We're not going to see it while Khamenei is alive. He is firmly wedded to his revolutionary principles and thinks that compromise is a big mistake. So the question is going to be what happens after he leaves. And we don't have a good sense, and we won't know until after he leaves.
Artavan.
No, just about the leader being totally entrenched. We should know, for example, that the leader of the conservative camp is his brother-in-law. Talking about a change in Iranian foreign policy, whether the leader passes away or not. Honestly speaking, I believe that no matter who's going to be in charge in Iran, Iranian foreign policy in the area won't be modified. It may change, it may become much more diplomatic, much more elegant.
So it's not about the person?
No, because at the end of the day, the Iranian people feel threatened by the rise of this medieval sectarian movement that ISIS represents. I mean, it is beyond doubt that had Baghdad fallen, Iran would have ended up with an extremely hostile country on its borders. Now look at the havoc that this medieval sect is generating across the globe as an isolated army. Imagine what they could have done were they to be in charge of Baghdad or Syria. And the Iranians understand this. And for the Iranian people and the civilization, as I dare say, it's an existential threat. So even if you had somebody with a tie sitting at a president's palace in Iran, their attitude towards ISIS, their attitude towards the extremist, Wahhabi-minded rhetoric that comes out of that region would not be modified.
Yeah, but Patrick Clausen was saying earlier, for instance, no one has, they're not going to try and, they haven't tried to patch up their dispute with Saudi Arabia. Speaking about ISIS is one thing, and jihadists and terrorists is one thing, but a regional dispute between two regional powers such as Iran and Saudi Arabia has to be a totally different thing. And Tehran could engage with Saudi Arabia.
Of course, but what is this dispute about? What is this dispute about? This dispute is about the role that Saudi Arabia finances, Saudi financing, Saudi ideology is playing all across the globe. I mean, the Iranians understand, and as the world is beginning to understand, as Donald Trump understood, that today the fundamental threat towards peace and stability in the Middle East is the Wahhabi version of Islam that is creating all the difficulties that we are encountering over there.
But you realize there's an argument that could be made that Iranian support for the Syrian regime, which is responsible for tens, hundreds of thousands of deaths, that also could be considered a source of instability. Patrick, we'll come to you in just a moment.
Iran, of course, is involved in these kind of operations, although Iran does not have any actual troops in Syria. There are advisors.
As commanders and military advice.
It is, I believe, although even one dead person is unacceptable, I don't think it is correct to put all the hundreds of thousands of dead people in Syria on the account of the regime. Because you have out there Al-Qaeda and ISIS who are also killing on a daily basis women, children, and all the others. The regime in Damascus, at least, although it's a totalitarian, awful, murderous regime, all that being granted, but at least if you're a Christian, you don't end up crucified. If you're a Shia, they don't bury you alive. And if you're a Kurd, you still get a chance to live.
All right, Patrick Clausen with the closing words.
The Iranian regime has sent more foreign fighters into Iran than Daesh has been able to recruit from abroad. Most of those fighting inside Syria right now are fighting with Iranian arms and with Iranian support. They are the ones who have blown up more than 40% of the housing in the country. They're the ones who displaced 6 million people. And Iran never attacks Daesh. Never once has Iran attacked Daesh. Iran attacks moderate forces that are opposing to the regime and leaves Daesh alone. And that's because Iran is got a sectarian agenda in the region, and it's inflaming sectarianism. That's why the U.S. government has said that the principal fundraiser for Daesh actually lives in Tehran, which seems remarkable to us in the West, but in fact Iran's policy has long been to bet on every horse in the race, and Iran is the one who's been feeding the sectarian conflict in the region. That's why we have seen sectarianism inflamed in this region, is because it's the Iranians who are out there, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in Syria, or whether it's in Yemen, encouraging a sectarian violence and sectarian conflict in which hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians die. Iran never attacks Daesh. Iran only attacks moderates who are fighting against the Assad regime.
Reza Marashi, just briefly, do you want to weigh in on this?
There's two broad-based points that I want to make here. First and foremost, Iran has reached out to Saudi Arabia extensively and repeatedly since Rouhani has come into office. Both the president, the foreign minister, the deputy foreign minister, and through a variety of track 2 meetings and through intermediaries in third-party countries. And to quote a top U.S. official recently told me, the Saudis aren't interested. So if and when Saudi Arabia becomes ready, willing, and able to talk, they will find a ready, willing, and able partner in Tehran. That's first. Second, and perhaps most importantly, if we're talking about Iran specifically and regional policies more generally, and this includes the United States and Europe, every single solution has been tried except collective security, meaning everybody sitting around the same table and trying to hammer out something, an agreement of some sort, whether it's Syria or broader regional issues, to ensure that innocent people stop being killed and conflicts can systematically come to an end. And there's no quick fix and there's no immediate solution to this. It requires days, weeks, and months of sitting at the table and talking. And if somebody tells you that that's not a good idea, then A, they should explain why we have foreign ministries around the world and what the purpose of diplomats is, first and foremost. And then second, they should explain why we should double down on things that have failed in the past. Because diplomacy's great promise is that you never know where conversations are going to go once they begin. And the nuclear deal is a personification of that.
All right, Reza Marashi, thank you very much. Point passionately made there. I'd like to thank you for taking part in our debate. I'd like to thank Ardavan Amir Aslani as well, Elie Jaranmaye in London, and Patrick Clausen, of course, in Washington. That wraps up the France 24 debate. Stay tuned for more news. We've got more insights on Iran and the upcoming Iranian elections with James Creedon in Media Watch, who's been scouring the web and social media.
That's right, Cyril, and quite, I would say, a focus in the Western media on the reform movement in Iran. There seems to be a real, almost an obsession with to what extent is reform now filtering into Iranian society, to what extent has the election of Hassan Rouhani in 2013 affected reform in society and the nuclear deal with the West. Well, according to the New York Times, there has been virtually no change, really, concretely speaking. The reformers are sort of on the back foot, if you like. This article in the New York Times describes the leader of the reformists, Mohammad Reza Aref, as being forced into the position of having to reassure hardliners that his movement does not oppose the 1979 revolution. We act within the system, he said at a recent rally, and nobody loves the revolution more than us. So I guess that doesn't paint a picture of a reform movement with a huge amount of energy. In The Guardian, they pick up on that point as well in this piece where, more broadly speaking, they criticise the simplistic reformist versus hardliners paradigm, but they do go on to talk about the reform movement, saying that it is organising a nationwide alliance, so it's perhaps a more optimistic take than the New York Times, and that the strategy includes casting negative ballots, sort of strategic voting, along with moderates. So the reformers and the moderates are forming a sort of an alliance to keep hardliners out, and to some extent this is working. So working within the system has its effects, and The Guardian speaks about the way in which you can test that it's working. Well, it's annoying the right wing. It's frightening the right wing, who are accusing the reformers of resorting to, or basically because the Western media is reporting on the reform movement, they're saying that this is actually Western inspired, that this is not grassroots and homegrown desire for reform, that it's imported from the West.
Yeah, going so far as to accuse reformists of having ties to the West.
That's right. So in a way, according to The Guardian here, that's a sign that this reform movement is actually managing to create some effects within the system. Now, quite a focus, as well as often is the case when elections come up in Iran, on the role of women, etc. This is an article in the Huffington Post. Where do women stand in Iran's upcoming election? It's by Samin Nouri, who is a Franco-Iranian architect. And she says, look, the number of women in the upcoming parliament is in many ways irrelevant, because they're not necessarily representing reform. They're often as traditional as men are as regards the role of women in Iranian society. There's also this piece in France Info, .fr, Liberty under the veil, and they this is a report where they look at various different women in Iranian society. This lady here, going by the name of Safura, is 34, and she's speaking about how she wants to marry for love, that she's rejecting the whole notion of arranged marriage. She had to reject 3 different attempts by her family to sort of arrange a marriage for her, and she did not want that. And she says she'd rather die than go into an arranged marriage. This is a woman entrepreneur, Fateme Mogimi. And she has founded clubs of female entrepreneurs, counting 500 to 600 members. There are some 13 of those clubs across Iran nowadays. She said that would have been unthinkable 5 to 10 years ago. And there are various other profiles such as that show perhaps that change is happening more on a civil society level than within the political system for now in terms of reform. Also, I suppose, new technologies permitting people to get around old sort of constraints. And there was quite a lot of reporting earlier this month about an application that allowed one to get around the so-called, I guess, morality police, the Gershad app. So people could upload in Tehran city the location of a morality.
And you can tell
police,
people where those agents are.
which allowed you to, well, walk around them. So
Circumvent the policing.
But it was shut down within 24 hours. So there is this constant sort of struggle or tug of war between reform, which I guess on a civil society level in any case, or at least reforms of systems of communication, etc., which are inevitable, and then I suppose the government, the systems that are already in place, trying to keep tabs on that.
Yeah, the tech-savvy youth versus the theocracy. Thank you very much. James Creedon with Media Watch. And you'll get more from James. Don't worry. Throughout the evening, live from Paris. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching us. Do stay tuned. More news coming up right after this.